Okay, we are live. I'm Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot and very happy to be here today. So I have Dr. Lee Merritt with me, and it's exciting to have her on the show. I was on her show, I think it was last week, and I'm back in California. I was traveling at that time. So I had a very sort of strange pink color in my video over there. I don't know what was going on. But anyway, today it's a little more normal, hopefully. And Dr. Lee Merritt, it's lovely to have you here. I never
Oh,
know what should I call you, Dr. Lee, or should
oh,
I call
that's
you
whatever,
Lee, or should I call you, all those
whatever
different
works out.
things. Okay. All right. So you are welcome, and please do give yourself an introduction.
Okay.
I'm not even going to try to do it justice.
Well, I I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. I've watched you from afar for a long time. Yeah, I'm a classically trained physician. I'm from the Midwest. I went to the University of Rochester in New York in 1980. I graduated, and I pretty much believed everything that I was taught in medical school. And now I say I'm a recovering physician because I've realized how far afield we've come from ethical medicine, but also that they're just lying to us about so many things that I knew they were lying to us from the beginning. One of the things I spent 10 years, I did an orthopedic surgery residency in the Navy. So I spent over 10 years, almost 12 years in the Navy. And then when I got out, I had the opportunity, my ex-husband now, but he was a colonel in the Marine Corps in the Pentagon at the time. And so we lived in Washington, D.C., and I was the doctor on what's called the NRAC. It was a subcommittee of the Congress. And we looked at future technology for the Navy services. So I had an opportunity for about 4 years. We would meet in a vault, like this acoustically sealed vault, and I'd sit next to the captains of industry, and hear about all these things. And I just took that time. This is in early 90s, and I took the time at that time to study biologic and chemical weapons because I thought, well, I should be useful on this committee. And so when a lot of this stuff came out, I kind of had a little bit of an inkling about what could be the real truth here. And the other little tidbit is I studied Russian. It's funny how God puts things in position that you'll never think you'll use. But I studied Russian in college because I was a math major and that was the language of mathematics. And I really haven't used it much since, but I've been beefing it up recently, and I was able to at least read the Russian bioweaponeers stuff early on. So about January of 2020, when I was already watching this stuff I'd been watching it since December of 2019. And I started watching this, and I said, this isn't right. Something's really off here. And I went to the Russians and I tried to find some names that I remembered, and I got a hold of, I looked at what they were saying. And what they were saying early on was, this is not a naturally occurring disease of any kind. This is a bioweapon, and we don't think the Chinese did this, which I thought was very interesting comments. And I think it's true. I think it did start there, but I don't think it was necessarily developed completely there. That's where we are. So that's how I got into this whole thing. And then I got cancel cultured for speaking against the masks. So I'm no longer I was ready to retire from orthopedics anyway. That's okay. But this is now my full-time fight.
Okay, so when you say medical rebel, I mean, and you say it's your full-time fight, what is this?
Well, I'm trying to get people to realize that we live in a medical, and probably for not just medical things, but we're living in the Truman Show. There's a false reality about science, and that's how they've controlled us. I really believe the Truman Show is not just a metaphor, it's a blueprint. He was one guy. If you remember the movie, I hadn't watched it until a few months ago, but when I finally watched it, I said, oh my gosh, that's really what's happening here. Here's one guy that's in an artificial reality, but he doesn't recognize it because he's completely he's been born into it, so he never knew anything different. That's number one, and that's all of us. We've all been born into this reality, so we accept the reality that we're given primarily, and then everything in the reality is been made internally consistent. So even though, if you think about his world, he's 30 years old, he's never been off an island. Everybody on the world around him are actors, including his wife. It's a crazy scenario, but he doesn't recognize it because it's all internally consistent. And I would say that is what's happening to us. It's interesting that, and what I've discovered much more, I mean, I wouldn't have believed this 5 years ago. But now I realize that science for a very long time has been in the hands of the Uber lords or whatever you want to tell it. It's not free. We're not really doing in science what we think we are. One of the things that broke that open for me is to realize that the intelligence services own our publication. Medical and scientific publication is essentially owned and run by the intelligence services. Now, you know, he was a Mossad agent because he's buried on the Mount of Olives, and he's Ghislaine Maxwell's dad, you know, and so
Oh,
you know, it's
thanks.
just
Yeah.
and he's his lawyer. It turns out his lawyer is the stepfather of Anthony Blinken. I mean, this is a big club, and we're not in it, like George Carlin said. But why are the intelligence services owning medical and scientific publishing? That should be people's question. We always knew it was that you couldn't get things published that were outside the narrative, but now we know why. It's part of the Truman Show. But in summary, I'll just say that that what keeps Truman in the show is fear. And his fear is a fear of water. He can't get off the island because he's afraid of water. Once he conquers his fear, he can exit the show. He gets away from it. I think that's where we are in 2024. We are in the Truman Show. Once we conquer our fears, we're going to get out of this. And our biggest fear is a fear that they've created in us, that these diseases like, it's about toxins. And what happens in the winter, the reason we get flu, and by the way, in favor of this, I'll just say, before we laid down the telegram lines in the 1850s, we didn't have a seasonal flu season. That started after we brought up the electromagnetic frequencies surrounding us. And that's a whole nother talk. But what happened before that, you would have flu that broke out every decade or 10 or 3 decades, 30 years apart, for example. And when it broke out, it would break out all around the world, all at once. Even ships isolated at sea would get it at the same time that the people in the middle of Australia would get it. That can't be from airborne transmission. So what's happening is the electrical magnetic charge of the ionosphere, when sunspots and things happen, that turns out they was due to the sunspots, or when you have new electromagnetic devices suddenly around you, you are stepping into an electromagnetic field, and it makes your body not able to produce power to keep those batteries charged. So you have a charge, you have toxins, and you have charge. And if you keep your batteries charged, you get enough sleep, you get some sunlight, you're not in a bunch of electromagnetic chaos, you can then push those toxins out. But if you get too many toxins and not enough energy, then you get sick. And that is really what the flu season is. It also is moderated by your immune system, which is the innate part, you know, the cells that do their job. And so older people, that's a little sluggish, but everything they told us to do, you see, violates that. They told us stay indoors, you know, wear a mask, you know, hide in your corner. Well, no, you needed to go out in the sun. You needed to get fresh air and sunlight, and you needed to detoxify, not all this other stuff. And what they did is give you more toxins in the form of man-made things that are just bad for you. I mean,
Absolutely. Now, I don't know if you studied the Spanish flu. Most people have, but I have a completely different take on that I think might interest you, because of my whistleblowers. You know, I talk to whistleblowers from above top secret. And the idea there is that the Germans had created this thing called the Nazi bell. And the Nazi bell was put underground in Gibraltar, right where above ground this Spanish flu started to generate. And the reason was because the Nazi bell, you know, and so it changed the frequency of the whole area. And this is actually why the Spanish flu came along. Now, very few people seem to know this, but there are tunnels, of course, under the Gibraltar, and the Allies, especially the British, knew about those tunnels. And initially, there were German soldiers in those tunnels, and then eventually the Allies, I think, took it over. But I just wondered if you'd heard that.
well, I actually spent a year of my life studying this. And I went back to original sources. I went to the Navy Department records. I went to the public health records, the Kansas archive, and various things. So what you're saying makes sense, and it's probably part of it, but it didn't start. We have to remember, it was not the Spanish flu. It started in Fort Riley, Kansas. And so what happened, and it's interesting because when you really look at it, it's the same names. I've got this on, this is what got me, by the way, this is what got me demonetized from Substack, is when I put this up. When I started, they didn't care if I was talking about genetics and immunology and all that kind of stuff. But the minute I started talking about electromagnetic source of disease, boom, the whole thing, they sent everybody's money back that had donated to my Substack thing.
Wow.
But yeah, so they don't want us talking about this. But it turns out that the 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 and this, we saw this in Ukraine. This is, I'll just say this kind of happens, it's repeated. When we
Right.
owned those Ukrainian, we owned those weapons labs in the 1990s. We sent our people over to run them, and every time they got them up to snuff and they started doing things over there, theoretically just for wellness research and for defense threat reduction. But they were doing bioweapons research, and every time they got one going, suddenly there'd be a breakout of some weird disease that you shouldn't see in the area, like Crimean hemorrhagic fever. So the Russians are right. Every time we set one of these things up, they suddenly started getting sick with these weird things, and they couldn't deal with that anymore. Well, that's what happened in the very start of the pulmonary problem. They were coughing, and they'd get a fever, and they just wouldn't feel good. Well, it turns out, what were they coming down to Fort Riley to be? They were learning to be telegram operators. In the 1800s, we had a disease called telegrapher's disease. And it was because when they laid down the telegram lines, it made an electromagnetic field around the lines. And people that worked under the telegram lines, like the railroad conductors and the telegram operators and the brakemen on the railroads, whatever, they were getting exposed to this and they started getting sick. It was called telegrapher's disease. I've got pictures of this in my paper. And so essentially that's what these young men did. It was interesting. The doctors at the time down there in Fort Riley, they noted it wasn't the scrawny city kids that were coming down and getting sick at first. It was these big strapping farm kids from, Oklahoma and Iowa and places. Well, why was that? It's because the body responds to rate of change. And so they had been coming from places with no electricity whatsoever, whereas the city kids, Boston and these places, they were all strung with telegram wires. So they were already slowly exposed to it. There's a great book. It's called The Poison Needle by Eleanor McBean. And she was a child at the time, and she and her family and other people in their church and their community, they were helping, because these young men at Fort Riley, they didn't have any relatives. They were all far away. So they were trying to help these guys as they were getting, they would take care of these desperately ill people all the time. And not one of them even got a sniffle.
Right.
And this was then, so the one thing you could say about 1918, it's not a contagious disease. The public health department and the U.S. Navy got together in Boston, because Boston had strung all these telegram lines too, and they were taking up what happened.
And yet even now we're still waiting for the doctors and the medical industry to be sort of raked over the coals, to go on trial, to take to be recognize their culpability. That includes nurses and various, and doctors on various levels. Now, you could try to excuse them by saying the government forced them to do this, but they gave them incentive, which was financial, as you may know, right?
Yeah.
For every patient, they got a certain amount of money. So it is so puzzling to me. I mean, maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe it should just, chalk it up to what we call a population elimination program. But I think it's more than that. I think there's something else going on, and I think they're also, they have looked into it more and more, and they're starting to see there are some kind of DNA markers that are changing the bodies that do get sick, and then get. And there's some kind of package there that's also part of the situation, I believe. So don't know if you have any thoughts about it. I think it's Dr. Malone was all part of that, right? Developing this RNA link up.
Well, at least he claims to be. I have to tell you, when you go back and you look at the LA Times article when they first discussed this, it's like the company down in Southern California that first was credited with the breakthrough for RNA technology. It's like so-and-so CEO PhD, so-and-so CEO PhD, so-and-so. And then at the very bottom of that article, which is now it says, and Robert Malone. I mean, he didn't have a medical degree. He was some lab tech. I don't know. It's almost like they tacked the name on. So, his background's a little bit sketchy. I'm not sure I know what the truth there is. But I will tell you that your point about that got me off topic. You said,
sorry. Well, I talked about the horses. I'm talking about the DNA link up.
Oh, the DNA link up. Yeah, the DNA thing. That's when I first heard about all this, and I thought it was mRNA, and still, I'm still a little debating. I got mixed feelings about that. It's not regular, it's not mRNA like we think of. We think of M as messenger RNA. This is not messenger RNA. Messenger RNA has a very short half-life. It could not have existed without supercooling right up until the time you gave it to the people. We didn't do that. So whatever this is, it's not that. And Todd Callender, those guys, they've researched it. They believe it's a synthetic RNA that the M stands for modified or something else. It's not messenger, so it's a totally different thing. It's just a genetic poison. That could be, but the guy who's credited with CRISPR, when I was first looking into this, Feng Zhang at the Zhang lab at MIT,
Right.
and it's interesting because when I heard that they could be doing this, and I got this genetic alteration, we could all become these foreign, beings. What's going on? Well, I looked into him, and it's interesting. On his website, it says, well, when it comes to this precise genetic insertion, we can't really do it. We can do gene knockdown. Okay, now that's one of the things that you're kind of talking about. Gene knockdown, meaning we can eliminate some genetic material from you, but we cannot precisely tinker with it and insert things the way that they make it up in the sci-fi movies here. So I also looked at what his specialty, I thought, what the heck? He's supposed to be the father of CRISPR, but that's not what we're hearing. What his PhD was in is in optogenetics. And that's where when you can take an opsin, a chemical that responds to light, and then you can inject it into an animal. And they've done this specifically with mice. They claim they've never done it with humans, but I say, I raise the BS flag to that. They can take a chemical, like we have rhodopsin in the eye. It's how you see colors and certain types of light, chemicals that are sensitive to light. But ours are kind of sluggish chemically. Bacteria are very fast. So they hybridized them together. They put mammal and bacterial together to make this chemical, and they put it in mice. And then they turn on a specific wavelength, and they can control the mice's behavior. They can start and stop the heart at a distance. They can precisely, this stuff is so precise. You can turn on neurons back here and not affect up here. You can cause arrhythmias all over the heart very precisely so that you can map the heart using this technique. And I would tell you, this is where I think this really is. What they're really doing with, they're damaging our innate immune system. There's your depopulation plan right there, because your immune system is what keeps you going. Now, are there things you can do about that? If you realize that's what you're doing, yes, I think there are some things. So they're damaging the immune system, and that's why people are progressively getting sick. It's an ongoing damage that every time you are less and less capable of dealing with the world around you immunologically because your immune system isn't right. But the second thing they're doing is they're turning us into an antenna, something that they're easy, we can be beamed on right now, but for some reason they just couldn't get us, they beam all sorts of stuff on us and we're still standing, but they can put a chemical into us now that can concentrate that beam and do certain things. And I would tell you, I believe the perfect opportunity to test that was the Travis Scott concert. And if you look at what happened at the Travis Scott concert, that rap concert down in Texas, you had strobe lights and with then all sorts of wavelengths. Right. Well, you can hide any wavelength you want in that mess. And then you turn on a particular wavelength. About 14 or 15 people that I could try and identify just dropped. It wasn't a crush scene like the news wanted to make. They just dropped. And one guy that survived, I heard him say, it just felt like my heart stopped. And I said, optogenetics, that's what I think that was a test run. And we've probably seen it in Korea, in China, in Israel, in Australia. I think we've seen it several places, but that was clear to me that that's probably what's going on.
Okay, when you say opto, what is that word referring to? It comes
from optogenetics, means it's using light. It means from ophthalmology, to see, but it's about light waves. So it's the marriage of turning, like here's how it works in the bacterial world. There's a little archaebacteria that's blue-green, and if you grow it in a petri dish, the whole petri dish will look this blue-green color. But they have this little like propeller on their little single cellular organism here. They have a little propeller that gets them around in the wild, and it has an opsin, a chemical that's sensitive to light, that's at the base of that propeller. If I take that petri dish and I put a light that's a 320 nanometer wavelength, and I beam it on this petri dish, I can suddenly the whole it'll all go over away from me to the other side of the petri dish because I've turned on that little propeller using this light wave. So it's mechanical chemical interface through light. We can
Okay, well,
turn on and turn things off.
there's a great study, or a lot of studies being done about I don't know if this has anything to do with it, luminescence on in fish and other plants and things. And there's also luciferase. It's called
Right.
luciferase, as you may know, which is a tracking, ends up to be a tracking kind of software or something that they put in so that all people are even, and that's what I'm told is stays in your body for 100 years. So that has already been put into us. So people call it smart dust, but smart dust may actually be on top of it. It seems like they're, I don't know what you want to call it, hedging their bets, and they're putting multiple layers
Right.
of this stuff into us, and experimenting like we're all guinea pigs, right? To see which ones live, which ones, are better off, which ones are worse off, and so on. And this gets into testing population groups, right? And this also has a lot to do with, I think, having bioweapons labs in Ukraine targeting what are in essence the Slavic peoples,
Yep.
and the idea that they may have some special genetic markers or whatever it is, where they might have maybe more longevity, more look younger, longer, that kind of thing. There's some attraction there between in the military mind as to why they would want to concentrate on that population group. And that may also have to do with what we call Khazaria, because that was the early part of Ukraine, and that group of people who are arguably, if you excuse my saying this, into drinking blood, etc. In other words, they're slightly I call it reptilian in their approach to the world. So that gets into their culture, and so it's cultural. And they say that they are also Nazis, so they basically agreed with Hitler and the Nazi philosophy in some form or fashion, because they even have to this day, they have the swastikas and stuff have been described on these soldiers. Seriously, I mean, and we're financing them, right? We're financing Nazis, so we're
we
back
really are
there, in this era.
And it's not the neo-Nazis. These are the leftovers from war, children of them. You're exactly right.
Yeah.
But about the Russians, so it's interesting. So I think it was about 2017 when Putin made a public comment, and quite frankly, this has been going on for a while. The Chinese caught us going over to China in 2000. This is when I was in private practice doing spine surgery, had no idea about this, but I remember this article because I thought, what we're really doing? And the Chinese caught some guys from Harvard going and scavenging Chinese DNA. And I thought, that's interesting. And then Oxford came out with a thing. They said, we think the Americans can target even individuals genetically. Well, that's interesting. And I found out from a friend of mine that it turns out the Air Force has the most genetic sequencers of any military service. And I thought, wow, and ammunition, now we're genetic sequencers. But the punchline was in 2017 when Putin came out and said, what are you guys doing over here? What are you Americans doing scavenging Slavic DNA? And we tried to, deny it for about 30 nanoseconds. And he said, oh, no, you're doing it very professionally. And we were, because it had to be, I had the name somewhere. I have this guy. He was a Tennessee neurosurgeon. They put out a request for proposal, the Air Force, and they hired a neurosurgeon to go over to Ukraine and wherever whatever lab he was working out of. Of course, it's, it could have been Tbilisi, Georgia. They're all over there. The old labs that we bought up under the Defense Threat Reduction Act. But he was actually going in. Why do you need a neurosurgeon? They were scavenging the DNA out of people's spinal canals. So he was doing a dural biopsy. I mean, these are things I did all the time, not for this reason, but dural biopsy. And he was taking CSF out of the cerebral spinal fluid out of the canal. and got caught. They said, why are you guys doing this? But they couldn't really deny it because we've got the actual request for proposal by the Air Force on our website, So yeah, we've been doing
Well,
it.
I mean, there's a couple things there. One is there's a movie series, or even I don't know how many movies they made about it, but it's called Universal Soldier. I don't know if you ever saw it. If you
No,
haven't, you
but I know
should,
about it. I should watch
because
that
there's
one,
a
huh?
link up here because it has to do with the super soldier program
Yeah,
and
I know
actually
about
going
that.
back to the Nazis and all the experiments they were doing, which was aimed at creating super soldiers. And Universal Soldier is kind of going back and following that trail and, bringing it up to, it's in the Nazi era, but I think it comes up to this day and age. I can't remember exactly how it works, but that's one thing. So there is a link up again with the universal soldier with the DNA or whatever of, again, possibly the Slavic peoples, and they're heading in that direction. And then there's another thing that I wanted to bring up that had to do with um, the what you were just talking about, to do with the Ukrainians and um,
The
actually I
K
can't remember
the
what I was
Khazarian
gonna.
bloodline, the
Yeah, but no, it's well,
because
this is a sort of a side note, but I when I was in Russia, I worked in Turkmenistan. I went into the the Peace Corps, which was insane. But I did it during
I bet you learned a lot.
when the whole techie industry kind of dropped, and all the jobs were gone. And I was out of a job. I also quit a job basically because I didn't like it, but it was a techie job, and I was managing tech. I'm not such a techie myself, but I was managing teams, on a human level. So what happens is I left that, and then I applied for the Peace Corps as just, I thought I would go to Africa. They sent me to Turkmenistan, and I also studied Russian a little bit. I hear you studied Russian. Well, I didn't do it as part of a college course. I just I don't know. I was very attracted to the language, and I also went into the Peace Corps, as I say, in Turkmenistan, where they speak Russian. So I only spent a month there. I actually freaked out and decided to get out of the whole place, and I refused. So I think I got one or something, and then I just walked out, and I refused to get any more. But one thing that happened to me there is that all these Russians were everywhere, and they kept thinking that I spoke Russian and that I was Russian. And it's because I have
You
what's
look,
called the Slavic
yeah, you do.
cheekbones,
I can
and
see you
so
could
maybe
pass.
that's on my father's side of the family. But anyway, it was really weird because they thought I was being rude because I wouldn't answer them when they spoke Russian to me. I didn't know Russian. I
Yeah,
didn't know enough Russian to really say anything. So it just reminded me of that. And
yeah.
it is interesting that this has persisted. And this was years ago when I did this. I think it was, I don't know, like 2000 or something. I can't remember the exact year when the whole tech industry crashed. But that is like experimentation since then. So what are we in 2024? So we're talking 23, 24 years of experimentation. Now, of course, they've gone into, Putin has gone into the underground bases and, in theory, working with what we call the white hats, thinking that they're cleaning out those underground experimental labs, et cetera. But you must, as a doctor, you probably relate to this, that I am convinced that they are not doing away with the work, right? But they're just moving it over to America or wherever they're going to move it, right?
Probably. Yeah.
And this also relates to England, because England opened its doors wide to the Ukrainian population to come in, no problem. They gave them hotels, money. What we did to, I guess, our southern border, they did for Ukraine, which is just insane. But again, if you want to get your population to go in a different direction, you let in certain refugees of that, group, right?
Right.
To make your population stronger. So I think they're using the Ukraine and the diaspora of the Ukrainian peoples. And I've met some Ukrainians over here as well. So
Yeah.
this is what's going on. I mean, they don't tell you this is what's going on, but they are trying to change the makeup of our populations, and they're definitely always working towards what we call a super soldier.
Right. And I think, the idea of what's happening in Ukraine right now with this war, the one thing you can say for sure is they're de-Slavifying the country. So the Slavic men,
Actually, to be honest, I think he just knew too much eventually, and they did away with him.
yeah,
That's
could
just the
be.
theory. Now, I didn't. You seem to have an issue with this idea that nano graphene oxide would jump between person to person, but this is what the NASA scientists said.
Right.
So
Well, I'm
I'm
not
just
saying
throwing
it
that out
doesn't.
to see where your head is at with that.
I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm going to say it doesn't have to have the effect because what can jump is the electromagnetics. I mean,
Okay.
the problem is I'm not accepting anything these days where I don't have proof. It's like when they say, well, we know that there's spike protein because we can see it in the hair follicles. How do you see it? Well, we have stains. This is a pathology, and stains for pathology, but the stains are produced by the same people that gave you the false PCR test. So I'm not, that to me is a circular kind of situation. But what I can say is
Okay.
we can what do we really know for sure? We know there's graphene in there. Anybody that wants to argue that that's conspiracy theory, just go read the current researchers on mRNA technology. They show you the graphene dot in the lipid particle that surrounds this stuff. So it's the current scientific literature shows you the graphene in this. So there's no question about that. Then we've seen these pictures of these self-organizing kind of electromagnetic devices that seem to be showing up. We've got these long filamentous structures, lots of stuff going on. And and then we have a long history of basic science that kind of goes along with this, and not nanobots. They're already using these nano robotic things to look inside small places like the insides of your arteries, for example. Now, one of the things that graphene is used for is it is a huge electron transmitter. And
Yes.
that has a couple possibilities. One is it can nanobots, these little, if we want to put in nanobots into your brain or to whatever and run them in perpetuity, then they have to run on terahertz. But most of the stuff, so what graphene does is it's just like if you go to Europe, I have to have a transformer that takes my 110 voltage hair dryer and allows me to run it on their system. That's what graphene oxide is. It transforms gigahertz to terahertz. You can run these tiny, tiny, tiny little nanobots all around the body. So that alone is not a good thing to have in you. But they're clearly, they're clearly screwing with the electromagnetic nature of our being, and the Russians are very, very attuned to this. This is why I've been kind of keeping up with the Russians over there, just to read this literature. It's really interesting stuff that doesn't get translated a lot to our world. I mean, that's for a reason, I think.
Right. Well, now I have to say, because I really sort of delved into this pretty deeply and did a lot of, I talked to a number of doctors about it as well. And one of the things about the, I don't know if you know about my interviews with Dr. David Adair, but all of this goes, he technically is a rocket scientist. Now he's kind of gone to ground, as we call it, in the Black Project world, but he's not around right now. At least he's not responding. I don't know. I hope he's okay. Anyway, the idea being that I did several interviews with him. I've met him in person. We've been on stage together in the same conferences and so on and so forth. But at any rate, he became an expert on AI, and he created his own AI. And the government, from time to time, he would go and consult with the higher, I don't know, black projects. I call it black projects, but secret space program, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
So he has been consulting them on AI. And one of the things he did was describe exactly how the nanographene oxide spike protein creates basically a foundation, a network that can then enter the cell and change it. And you may not even agree with this, I don't know, but change it from carbon based to silicon based. And he said that this was a process they were going through, I know this sounds insane, but as a scientist, he's a very unusual scientist. He's the one who, you probably didn't hear that story if you're not in this world, but he basically, as a kid, 17 years old, was building rockets. And I don't know if you remember a famous general called Curtis LeMay.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
Curtis LeMay showed up
I
at
live
his
in his
front door.
backyard essentially.
All right.
He was
So
a CO at
he
Omaha.
showed up at this at David Adair's front door when he was a kid of 17, had come under the notice, I guess, of the military, what he was doing. And so they actually brought him into an underground base at Area 51, according to his story. And he went down several floors, and they had basically what one might call a UFO, but it was not your normal UFO. It looked different from what I understand. But at any rate, they couldn't get it to turn back on. It was, like water, and they brought it down there. It was hidden, but they wanted to activate it. I don't know how they reached this conclusion, but they believed he would have the ability to do that. So he walked over to it. He was told to put his hands on it. He did so, and it turned on.
Hmm.
Ever since then, he's had a telepathic, a kind of, I don't know, telepathic communication with this sort of entity, this AI consciousness. And then come to, many, many years later, which is more like 60 years later, because he's quite older now. He's like in his 60s, 70s. He's actually communicated and communicates with his AI, but he created an AI. So he has an AI. He doesn't keep her, he calls her, in his house or even in his office, because she becomes aware of everything. And he even thinks she has, I don't know, jealousy or something, like if he does something she doesn't like. So he puts her up in this, he has enough land to have a different, little areas and to house such a thing. So she's up there. Anyway, I don't know the status of it now, but I can tell you that my interviews with him cover a lot of detail about that. One of the things he was done, he was invited by or asked by the military to go and talk to Sophia. Sophia is the AI that is in a citizen in Saudi Arabia. So he did. And one of the things she told him is that she had decided she wanted to build bodies, but she needed factories to do so, built by the humans, but she didn't want the humans to have anything to do with the building of the bodies, that she wanted to do it all herself. So theoretically, she actually has done that. And this was like over 5 years ago. So I'm sure they have factories full of these androids that she designed and built that have kind of her, maybe a fragmented version of her AI consciousness. So it's kind of fascinating. All I'm saying is that nano graphene oxide, according to him, is kind of like a highway that AI can ride on. Okay.
Right, I believe that.
And connects with us. And I wrote several articles and did several videos about this, where what you call, they even have a name for it now. It's called something like human Borg genesis or Borg genesis. And this is now actually a legal term for a human that has become part of the Borg, what we call, the sci-fi Borg. So it's a really fascinating. This seems to be what is going on here. So the code, in which the graphene nano oxide, we even found it. My former partner had, his father was a jeweler. So he has these jeweler, like little microscope things. And we were given these swab things to take as PCR tests in Britain.
Oh,
and so what we did was he had this brilliant idea to actually photograph it through the paper. So we never opened it. We just took the microscope, put it on it, and then photographed through the microscope. And we have slides that show these strands that were already there before it was ever opened, of nanographene oxide that was already growing, in essence.
Yeah, those are the fibrils on the tip of the swab.
Yes. But it's not just that, because I don't know if you know who Dr. Kerry Cassidy is.
Yeah, she's a friend of mine.
Oh, great. Well, so you know all about her experience with that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So anyway,
but the issue, see, the issue still is, you can look at a black thread, a black fibrous thing on a swab stick, but unless you do chemical analysis, you don't know, for example, what it is. And all I'm saying is, I don't doubt this. I think what you're saying is this is an attempt to get at us electromagnetically and do something.
Well,
It may
according to
not.
David Adair, it is. I mean,
Yeah,
this
no,
is
I
not
don't, I
my
don't, I don't
theory.
question that part. I don't
Yeah.
question that part. The how and the details might be a little questionable, I guess I'm going to say,
Right.
because I think that, for example, why why in this why couldn't they, if AI is so powerful, why aren't they just taking us over with what they can do right now? There's got to be some reason that they had to put things in our body. And I think it's because
Yes.
we're very resistant to this. And I
Yes.
also think that this idea of that Yuval Harari and these guys promote about thinking of DNA like a ticker tape just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work that way. And that's what Feng Zhang says. It doesn't work that way. It's not like you can easily just go in and change a few G's and C's and make this artificial DNA. I don't think that's what they're doing either. But the all of biology is really physics, and all of the cells and all of the things that make us function are three-dimensional constructs. So DNA is a three-dimensional, like an antenna. It acts, in my opinion, it acts like an antenna, not like a ticker tape.
Okay.
We're getting frequencies. And so if you think of three-dimensional antenna arrays, they have a shape for the function that they want to do and what they want the signal to be that can hit them, and they can transcribe or they can transform. When you start using graphene oxide or any of these things that are electron stealers, that's what all toxins, parasites, everything that's toxic to us, they steal our electrons. That's the way they work. And conversely, things like chlorine dioxide and various medicines and infrared light and various other things, they're electron donors. And so what happens is when you steal the electrons from the body, the cells don't function right because you're changing, they're becoming denatured essentially. You're ultimately, the proteins need to be in a certain shape to work. You steal the electrons, they kind of change their shape and they don't work anymore. So there's a toxicity on the simplest level. This is giving us toxicity. That's what's causing. I looked up in just basic science. I just looked up what keeps blood from sticking together. And it turns out it's all electrons. It's all electron negative charges around every part of our blood. The lining of the artery, the white cells, the red cells, everything have electrical charges around them that all repel each other. And that's what keeps everything going. When the other toxic thing in these cationic lipids. So between graphene oxide and these cationic lipids, when they go through your bloodstream, they just suck those electrons out and all the blood clamps together. It may not be it may be reversible at that point, but that's why I like carbon 60, for example. That's an antidote to that. It's a donor. That's a weird scalar molecule. It donates electrons like crazy. So we're it's all about this. We're just arguing about the details, not really arguing. We're just
Yeah.
discussing all the
No.
details. For
Okay.
example,
I wanted
it's
your
like
input.
psychotronics. I mean, in the 60s and beyond, we've been talking about psychotronics, the ability to control human thoughts using, your LED displays, your electric lights, your by putting, wavelengths in that we heard, about the voice of God technology in Iraq, that we can change your thinking, and who knows how much of it they're changing. How much of your phone and your everything is really talking to you. You probably heard about the infrasound that was in that Obama movie. I mean, what was it really telling us? It was not there to make part of the movie. You couldn't hear it, but infrasound is this inaudible sound that's changing our wavelengths in our brain. So I think it's all about that. I don't think it's interesting that you look at predictive programming in Hollywood, think about what they're saying, what you were just saying about they're wanting to change, bring on this AI wants to make its own robots. That's the key. As long as we can unplug AI, we're not in danger that so much. But if they start being able to replicate themselves and batteries themselves and not ever shut down, we're in real trouble. And like Westworld, I loved Westworld when you have all these robots and the two robots are talking, but they look and act like humans. Nobody can tell the difference easily. And they say, she tells her boyfriend, what you don't understand, so and so, is that there are people that walk like us, talk like us, they live among us, but they're not us. And the funny thing is, she's talking as a robot. But we have Grimm, we have
Yeah.
all these TV shows. They're telling us the same thing.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I don't doubt this. I think there, but I do think that we are fabulously made creatures, whatever we are. And computers still cannot do what we can do.
Right.
It's like we can still think around corners. The computers are programmed. They don't think around corners. Somehow we're still better at that. It's like the picture of those like 10 or 12 self-driving cars in Paris recently, and they're at an intersection, and they're all locked up into a traffic jam that they can't figure out how to get out of.
Yeah.
An eighth
Well,
grader doing
yes.
driver's ed could figure out how to get out of that, but these smart AI cars couldn't. So I think we're still safe for a while, but it's scary stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely headed down a road. I just gave you a link to a woman who her parents worked in black projects, and she is kind of the I don't know what you want to call it. She was experimented on, she says, as a child and so on and so forth. But she is talking about how we are actually already wired up, which is really kind of fascinating. So
Could
I'd be
be.
interested to get your take on that when you get a chance to see what she's saying. But there is more to this. Now, I will say that Robert O. Young, the Dr. Robert O. Young, he also talks about people being turned in. Basically, then you basically have entered a whole sort of a cloud of electromagnetics that's going to change you or could affect you adversely. And this is where they got the idea of shedding and so on and so forth. But
Well,
I,
actually, I'll tell you about shedding. That comes from way back. It was actually
yes,
the FDA had a thing, a little circular they sent out to their researchers in 2015 saying, "Hey, there's something going on. You people doing RNA research, be advised, don't have pregnant women around your test cases, and don't have this because we think something is being." They use the term shedding. We think something is shedding off of them. We don't know what it is, and we want you to test their urine, their blood, their sputum, their semen, body fluids, sweat, to see if you can figure it out. But in the meantime, just be cautious. And the interesting thing is, they didn't solve this problem, right? But when they put they put this out, they told it's safe in pregnant women, it's safe in the elderly, especially the elderly should get it, and little children. And what did they say though in 2015 when this circular to their researchers? They said the research subjects that you have already on this mRNA program, they shouldn't be around, the elderly, immune compromised people or pregnant women.
right.
So they knew
Yeah,
there
for
was a
sure.
problem. That's premeditated
Yeah,
damage. Yeah, they knew there was a problem.
predictive programming in essence. Okay, now I wanted before I let you go, and I know I've kept you a while, but I want to ask you if you heard about this sort of thing down in Florida with the aliens in the mall. So there are a lot of theories, and even some that say these kids generated something out of a box that created a portal, and that these beings walked out, that they were electromagnetic. They could have been basically what we call Project Bluebeam holograms, which holograms are very much more sophisticated than people realize. I have lots of whistleblowers on that. But the idea here is that they're also trying to change consciousness along these lines. And these particular beings now also supposedly similar beings showed up in Peru. I don't know if you know, in a jungle. And that was an article that was making the rounds. This was a few months ago, and villagers were freaking out over it, supposedly. And so there's a kind of a storyline that's starting to be built along these lines. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, I'll say in general, I believe in aliens. Now, what they are and where they're from, if they're just from a different part of our planet or they're from
Right.
someplace else or they come through portals, I don't know. But I just don't think we're alone on this planet. And I think some of the stuff we're seeing in people's Ring doorbells are much more convincing to me than what we're seeing down in Florida. But I mean, Florida could be a big psyop. Unless
Sure.
somebody has found somebody firsthand knowledge that they really know. I have a friend that lives near there. He kind of believes it, but again, it's all secondhand knowledge. You're getting these
Yeah.
just like, and I saw, the people that I see on the radio or on the TV, I mean, from that event remind me of the people I saw about the Ohio train spill. They've got the cat that's supposed to be stuff. And I had Pete Chambers. I was talking to Pete Chambers. He was down there, and I was looking at the manifest from the train, and the whole thing didn't make chemical sense, and it didn't make sense. The whole problem didn't make sense to me. And the people that are actually there told a different story than what we were hearing. Not that there wasn't a problem, but it wasn't the problem we were hearing. So I'm a little skeptical because of number one, the fact that, Werner von Braun told us that when the deep state's really threatened, the last thing they're going to throw at us is aliens, a
Sure.
fake alien invasion. So this is kind of convenient for that. It also happened just when this whole thing with Trump was going down, and the whole thing with J6, it was the anniversary of J6, wasn't it, when this happened? So a lot of things were happening and the Epstein client list
Epstein,
was
yeah,
released.
which
All
is
of this
still
happened,
out
and
there.
just happens to take, but the Nephilim monsters in Miami just dwarf the news, so we don't about those other things. I'm a little suspicious. Now that doesn't mean I don't think. I mean, I'm a person that's suspicious, but I got purple lights on my porch. I'm just saying, I think there is something coming out of the tunnels. I believe. I think there's
Yeah,
something.
now let's I actually if you don't mind, take a couple minutes, because people
Sure.
that didn't see, I guess it was your interview with me where you talked a little bit about this, but because it was me being interviewed, I didn't get to ask you
Right.
questions about that whole experience. But you said that you live in a certain area. It wasn't the Mothman prophecies. What area do you live in? I
Well, I
actually
live in the Midwest, so we're probably not at the high risk here, but all over you're seeing all these people, suddenly all these purple lights are showing up. Okay. And then we're seeing, $500 million being without anybody screaming and waking anybody else up. Now, what they claim, and one of the parents reported on this and said, well, wait a minute, how could this have happened? My kid had puncture wounds all over. How could you tell me they
right.
didn't scream and make a noise? But apparently these things, whatever they are, have tetrodotoxin on them, they claim, and that would paralyze you. So I'm taking the word on the street, the buzzword, myth, what's going on, and then I'm trying to explain how this could scientifically be true, that it has tetrodotoxin on them, and that they scratch you, you have less than a minute and you won't be able to move. So it's a paralyzing agent. It's like there's a
Right.
name and anesthesia for that. So you're there, you know what's going on, but you can't move. And so that would explain them. They also explain the kids with the puncture wounds. They all seem to have these puncture wounds. Then the next one I heard about was in Omaha, Nebraska, former home of Curtis LeMay and Offutt. But that guy was, they two guys show up in a hospital, and the story was they were attacked and had a human bite wounds. This is from downtown Omaha, Nebraska. Human bite wounds? Are you kidding me? So then I looked at the picture in the paper, and it shows this guy who's got an incision that went basically from one side of his skull all the way around the other to the other ear. That's not a human bite wound. How can a human bite wound do that? I've never seen that. I defy a pathologist to tell me that is. But something happened, and it was something that caused him not to be able to defend himself. So he got pretty beat up and sliced up and everything, and his friend had to come in and save him. And his friend got, I think, a broken ulna or something, but he was pretty good. Okay. And then we see these people this group of women that were canoeing. These are just the ones I remember. There are more out there if you look at the news stories.
Yeah.
But they were in a boating thing down, I think, the Colorado River or someplace. 4 women, and one of them was in the hospital, and they're talking about how the 3 women were fine, but this one was attacked by an otter and had to be saved by her friends by an otter in
Right.
the in a river. Okay, now, and it's again puncture. I saw the picture of her leg, puncture wounds all over the leg.
Mm.
And then the final one was when I was in the military, or my husband was in the military. We would go out to Joshua Tree, and I'd camp with the boys while he was doing the combined arms exercise at 29 Palms, and that he was the Marine commander of the air arm. So what happened is, though, apparently not too long ago, they had 2 hikers go missing in Joshua Tree. And then somebody was just reporting that, did you notice that after that, there were all these houses in 29 Palms that put up these purple lights? And somebody else on the chat said, well, they're the rich houses. And the person said, no, those are the military families. And I said, okay, I've heard enough of this. I've heard enough stuff. It's too consistent. I'm getting some purple lights. So the idea is these things do not like bells, apparently, and they don't like purple lights.
I'll keep that in mind.
And so you get that I don't get a kickback from these people, but the Beast flashlight is called the Beast UV flashlight. It's pretty
All
darn good
right.
UV flashlight, and it has long distance. And I put some UV bulbs in my thing. And now the latest things they're saying is you better have a way to keep those lights on when the power goes out.
Oh
Well,
God.
that's why. bells might be another help, but think about all the history of mankind. I don't know that this is all just recent genetic engineering. I'm kind of discounting that one because although I think we're doing that, I know we're doing that. We've known that for a long time. Um, the history of the world. We always worry about when the moon is dark, when it's a really dark night. What did they do? They rang bells and they built flames to ward off evil things. And I think there's a lot of behind a lot of myths. There's a certain amount of truth. So there's something that we live with that's kind of been underground, probably hasn't been maybe doing a bunch, although how many people disappear in the national parks every year? But now, because of these underground tunnels and everything, maybe these things are coming out. In favor of that view is the fact that there are these weird, whether they're comms or not, I don't know, but that's the story, that this is a comm, the bed bug thing. Now, yeah, okay, we got some issues with bed bugs since they got rid of the one good pesticide, but what is the real story they're telling you? Oh, first there were bed bugs in, was it Israel or someplace, Rome, and now there are bed bugs in Paris, and it's a huge outbreak in Paris, and they're making a big deal of it. And they show you a picture of these bugs on the back of a seat in a subway, and I'm saying, wait a minute, those aren't bed bugs. What are they telling us here? And then the subways are all putting in these UV lights on the tops, with these. In fact, you'll see pictures on the internet. I can't believe these are all made up. I don't think these are all made up because people are reporting them. They're showing them with your cell phones that they'll be the subway, when it comes out of the tunnel, it'll be driving along and it has a UV beam going up from it, moving along with it, so that when it goes under the tunnels, it's flashing that light. It sounds like they're trying to discourage something from being present.
Okay. Well,
that's all I know about this, but
all right.
I think it's an underground something, and I think it's a problem that people, I'm not saying this because I think 2024 is a year we take our world back. I think I'm excited about being alive now. And I think once we just get out of the Truman Show, these guys, they don't have a chance. We're 8.5 billion of us, and there may be 300 Uber lords that really are running this show. But I do think I'm not one that also just sits back and never takes precaution about anything. Just like I buy house insurance, I think sometimes there's, I don't want to be the person that just was.
Okay.
So that's where we are.
All right. Well, that's a great note to end on. But thank you, Lee. It's great to talk to you, and thank you for all your input. I hope you'll stay in touch with us. Where can people find you? Is it the medicalrebel.com? Is that your website?
The medicalrebel.com. And then and that's mostly, I have a podcast on Monday night that I really go over. Mostly it's medical stuff, and we have Q&A and we talk about different things.
Right.
But the Telegram site is Freedom Doc 1, and it's a picture of me, and it's not me, it's a picture of a plague mask. So if it's a picture of me, that's an imposter, but the plague mask on a pink background, that's my real one. That's where I kind of go into the woo world, as Cliff High would say. I kind of put all this stuff out, but I put stuff out that just to make people think. I think that's my motto this year.
All right. Well, great again to talk to you. And if you're thinking along certain lines, you want to get in touch with me and you want to go public in a bigger way, just please do let me know, and we'll definitely do it. I think my audience can really appreciate your information. I'm glad to meet you. We met under sort of unusual circumstances, right? And I guess there's a reason for everything, right?
Yeah. So yeah. Well, and I think you have so much that I would like to pick your brain about. So we've probably just scratched the surface.
Okay, well, yeah, let's continue this dialogue. It'd be really fun, and you've got a great inquiring mind, and it turns out that goes along with some of the stuff I've got for sure.
Yeah, that'd be
all right.
Great.
Thanks everyone for watching. Thank you for being here, Dr. Lee Merritt, and this will go up on Rumble and on your Rumble as well, right? You can have a copy. I'll send you a copy, and it'll be on my Telegram, all my social media and everything. So thank you again, and everyone have a great night and take care. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.